Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to the B segment of episode 17 of Codename Kids Next Door, Operation Fast Food. We begin this segment with number 3 being surprised by her teammates when she enters her room in the Sector V treehouse on this particular day. And that's because the day this segment takes place on is actually number 3's birthday. Number 1 makes a point to mention that it's Kids Next Door tradition for the teammates of the birthday operative to grant the birthday wish of the birthday operative, as long as it's in their ability to do so, of course. Number 3 says that her birthday wish is to lead a mission, much to the surprise of her teammates. Number 4 in particular doesn't seem to think that number 3 would be able to lead a mission, and this leads to number 3 and number 4 getting into an argument over whether or not number 3 would be able to lead a mission. Eventually, number 4 says that number 3 would ruin the mission before it even begins, and this leads to number 3 crying. Number 1, however, says that he does have a mission in mind, but he hypes this mission up as being potentially dangerous, and he questions if number 3 is up for the challenge. And number 3 responds that yes, she is up for the challenge, and she puts on a helmet as well. The next scene shows the Sector V operatives in a flying vehicle, and they've arrived outside of a fast food restaurant known as Burger Frenzy. It turns out that the mission is for number 3 to order a kids meal from Burger Frenzy. After number 3 enters the fast food restaurant, number 4 compliments number 1 by saying that it was, in his words, very slick of number 1 to have the mission be ordering a kids meal. Number 1 responds that he did have to think of a mission for one of his fellow teammates. So the rest of the Sector V operatives are now just playing the waiting game until number 3 finishes ordering the kids meal. Inside Burger Frenzy, number 3 approaches the counter, and we find out that the owner of the fast food restaurant is none other than Chester from Operation Camp. Number 3 comments about how she's on an important mission for her birthday, and Chester responds that number 3 would be perfect for one of his kids' meals. Chester then pushes a button which causes some claws to capture number 3 and put her on a conveyor belt, which leads to number 3 being put inside of a giant hamburger. And Chester is then putting number 3 in the giant hamburger in a giant hamburger box, saying that the kids' meal is quite literal about, as in a meal with kids in the meal. That's what Chester means by kids' meal. Outside the sector, the rest of the Sector V operatives are growing impatient, although number 1 questions about if the restaurant has been around before, but number 4 says that this particular fast food restaurant had only just recently opened, and number 1 notices that the kids' meal, as being advertised on the sign of Burger Frenzy, comments that the kids' meal includes a drink, a toy, and a kid on a bun, and number 1 is trying to figure out what exactly that means. And this leads to the other Sector V operatives present to try and figure out what a kid on a bun means in the sign. Inside a Burger Frenzy, just before Chester closes the giant hamburger box, he gets a notice that his first true customer, in his words, has arrived. So Chester is on an intercom to contact whoever has arrived, and they want a kids meal. So Chester then closes the giant hamburger box, and then he heads to the drive-through window. The customers in question happen to be a family of sharks, and yes, it's a family of sharks that are in a minivan, but the minivan is filled with water on the inside so that the sharks are able to breathe. And the sharks are talking in a language that's incomprehensible for us, the audience. So I guess you could say it's the shark language. So, however, even though the sharks are talking in the shark language, there are subtitles or closed captions for us, the audience, to understand what they're saying. So the family consists of a father, a mother, and a son. The father's name is revealed to be Gil, and the son's name is revealed to be Bruce. It turns out today is not just number three's birthday, but it's Bruce's birthday as well. And Bruce wanted to have a kid's meal as his birthday meal. So the Shark family pull up through the drive-thru to the drive-thru window, and Chester gives them the giant hamburger box, and they give him gold coins as payment. So the Shark family are then driving off, and Bruce wants to eat his Bruce wants to eat his kid's meal right away, but Mrs. Shark insists that Bruce wait until they return home. While the rest of the Sector V operatives are still trying to figure out what a kid's meal or what a kid on a bun means for the kid's meal exactly, number 4 notices the minivan of the Shark family, and he points this out to his teammates. It's only then when the rest of the Sector V operatives figure out that a kid on a bun is quite literal, and that they realize that number 3 is trapped in the hamburger box that's with the Shark family. So the rest of the Sector V operatives board their flying vehicle, and we then get a long chase sequence of the Sector V operatives, the rest of the Sector V operatives besides number 3, chasing after the Shark family in order to save number 3. Despite their best efforts, though, the Shark family do manage to arrive at the docks to re-enter the ocean, they're heading for the water. That's what number 1 says. And Bruce manages to convince his parents to let him eat his kid's meal before they return home. So Bruce opens up the hamburger box just as they're about to leave the docks. And just as the rest of the Sector V operatives are about to try and rescue number 3, the minivan enters the water, and then the empty hamburger box emerges to the surface, which horrifies the rest of the Sector V operatives. Back at Burger Frenzy, Chester is giving himself a pat on the back over his latest scheme, that as long as there are kids that he can capture and sharks that are hungry, he'll be able to make lots of money. What Chester doesn't realize, however, is that number 3 actually managed to escape the hamburger box before he gave it to the Shark family, and she's hiding on the ceiling waiting for a moment to strike, and now she takes the chance to surprise attack Chester. Chester is baffled that number 3 wasn't in the kids' meal box, saying that now the sharks are going to want their money back. But number 3 says that she's determined to complete her birthday mission. So number 3 and Chester fight each other, and eventually number 3 is able to trap Chester in the conveyor belt that's supposed to put kids in giant hamburgers. And while this is happening, number 3 switches the open sign to the close sign for the restaurant. When number 3 exits Burger Frenzy, she sees the rest of her teammates are planning to storm Burger Frenzy to avenge number 3's alleged demise. But number 3 says hi to her teammates, and they realize that she's alive, and they're quite happy to see that their teammate is still among them. So they're cheering that number 3 is safe and sound, and number 3 comments that this was a great birthday mission for her to lead. Back inside Burger Frenzy, we see that Chester is regaining consciousness after he was put inside a giant hamburger and trying to figure out what just happened. But then suddenly he hears noise outside of Burger Frenzy. And when he looks outside, Chester sees that there's a lot of minivans full of shark families that are circling Burger Frenzy. And that's how we end the segment. So here we go. We have ourselves a number 3 spotlight appearance, and it actually is about her birthday. So this is the first birthday entry of Codename Kids Next Door, and it won't be the last birthday entry either. Now, they don't outright say it within the segment itself, but I do remember around the time when this segment first aired, a lot of fans were wondering how old number 3 is now, because they didn't actually say how old number 3 is right now. And yeah, there have been shows in the past where you would have an ageless birthday, or you would have a birthday entry, but they don't mention how old the character becomes. So a lot of fans, I remember, were surprised when around the time this segment first aired, Tom Warburton had actually clarified that number 3 is now 10 years old as of this segment. So that means number 3 was 9 years old during season 1 and the earlier segments of season 2. And yes, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Tom Warburton had also mentioned in that statement that revealed this was her 10th birthday, I believe he also mentioned that number 3 is the youngest of the Sector V operatives. Now, I tried to refine that, but yeah, I couldn't find that again when I tried to look for it recently for the recap and thoughts video. But yes, I do remember that from around the time when this segment first aired. But yes, number 3 is the youngest of the Sector V operatives, and she was 9 years old for the beginning of the series, but now she's 10 years old. And otherwise, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's clarified or at least implied that number 5 is the oldest of the Sector V operatives. I'm not really sure about the ages of the 3 other Sector V operatives, the male operatives. But yeah, it was pretty cool at the time how Tom Warburton had clarified number 3's age for viewers when at the time a lot of viewers were used to birthday entries not really telling us the age of the characters. But we actually did get an answer for Codename Kids Next Door. Now, otherwise, besides being a spotlight appearance for number 3, this is also the second segment where Chester is the focus villain. And this segment actually does have Chester's name said out loud. It's actually mentioned when Chester is referring to himself in the third person when he's patting himself on the back for his latest scheme. And the credits also refer to him as Chester as well. And yes, this segment in particular kind of highlights how Chester really stands out among the rogues gallery of Codename Kids Next Door. TV Tropes in particular did well at describing this, I feel, but essentially TV Tropes had described Chester as not being the most evil villain in the series, but his villainy still comes off as looking worse in comparison. Like, yeah, Father is still considered a more evil villain, but Chester's villainy is seen in a much worse light. And TV Tropes describes it as Chester's motive is greed, essentially, because, yeah, Chester's motive is to cause harm or to exploit kids, whether they're Kids Next Door operatives or kids that aren't Kids Next Door operatives, and he's willing to do whatever it takes just to to line his pockets with cash. And yeah, I can definitely understand how Chester does look worse, even if he's not necessarily the most evil villain in the series. It actually reminds me of a very famous book series where even though the main villain is very evil and probably the greatest evil within the book series, there is another villain who comes off looking worse to many readers, or in the eyes of many readers, another villain comes off as looking worse despite the main villain doing greater evil actions. So I can definitely understand those sentiments about Chester coming off as looking pretty bad, even though his villainy, Chester's villainy coming off as looking really bad, even though there are villains who have done greater evil in comparison. And TV Tropes also did mention how most of Chester's focus appearances or spotlight appearances as the focus villain do tend to have a lot of psychological terror to them, Chester's entries usually have nightmare fuel on the psychological level, and I can definitely understand that. I guess you could argue it was there even in Operation Camp, but it's definitely more prevalent in his later appearances. And some would argue that Chester's scheme in this segment was probably his most cruel or his most vicious one yet. And I can't say I blame anyone for feeling that way. This probably was Chester's most despicable scheme. And actually, yes, I notice a lot of fans or a lot of viewers look back on this segment as actually being much darker than they might have remembered initially. And I can definitely understand that. Like, the segment does present itself, like, even with some, like, over-the-top situations. Like, Chester himself in particular kind of comes off as sort of a quirky villain, like, because he might have a goofy sounding voice or goofy mannerisms, but the fact that he does pretty despicable actions despite the goofiness actually might highlight or might add to Chester being such a despicable villain. Like, his silliness doesn't really make him less unsettling. It adds to it, actually. And the other over-the-top situation in this segment was a family of sharks riding a minivan. That sounds pretty silly, but the idea of sharks actually coming to land to eat kids as part of a hamburger meal, that actually does have some pretty dark undertones to it. So yeah, I can definitely understand that. The segment might have some over-the-top or silly ideas to it, but that doesn't necessarily hamper the dark undertones. Some might argue it actually enhances those dark undertones, and I can understand why. And otherwise, speaking of the shark family, yes, the shark language was an interesting take for the characters. So I imagine that Kevin Michael Richardson, Cree Summer, and Tom Kenny, the voice artists who provided the voices of the shark family members, probably were having fun in the recording booth when they recorded their lines for the shark family. But otherwise, and yeah, I did like this segment because it did show how the Sector V operatives care about each other. Even though number 4 did seem dismissive of the idea of number 3 leading a mission initially, he still showed that he still does care about number 3. He was definitely horrified at the possibility that number 3 met her end, and we did see that the rest of the Sector V operatives were very much willing to avenge number 3 and were relieved when they saw that she was alright. And number 3 herself definitely got to show her chance in the spotlight. Even though number 3 was underestimated by her teammates because of her status as the youngest of the Sector V operatives, she still managed to put a stop to Chester's scheme. So it was good that they showed number 3 got a chance to shine on the entry dedicated to her birthday. So otherwise, there we go for this particular segment. So we got ourselves our first birthday entry of the series. Number 3 got to have her chance in the sun for her birthday. And like I said, we had the usual over-the-top situations of the series, but those over-the-top situations don't necessarily hinder the darker undertones of this particular segment. So otherwise, there we go for now. As of this video, we've now discussed the B segment of episode 17 of Codename Kids Next Door on this channel. Take care, and until next time.